Hello, my name is Colson Rivers. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about conflict in the workplace, developing skills to communicate more effectively. My name is Colson again, and I'm a student at University of North Georgia. I'm just wrapping up a course on conflict resolution. So the textbook from that course is where I'm going to be pulling a lot of this material, as well as some psychological and communications journals on the topic. So first, let's talk about what conflict in the workplace has been in our experience. So I want you to grab a piece of paper or just think about it for a second. What experiences you have gone through, whether that was like an argument or perhaps even yelling or a different kind of verbal altercation or something like that. Just sit there and think about those times that you've experienced that kind of conflict. And so pause the video here and take a minute to discuss those with those around you after you think about it for a second. Okay, so I hope you learn something about each other and understand your experiences better as you are here in this group. What were those experiences for you? If it was some kind of verbal altercation or whatever it may have been, conflict is always present. The inevitability of conflict is something that's widely agreed upon in the communications and psychological field as something that is always going on. And so it's important to understand how we respond to conflict. What are the ways that we can do that? And perhaps what even is the best way? And that's what we're going to talk about today. At the end of this training session, trainees will be able to effectively and consistently employ the STLC method of conflict management. And we're going to talk about what those STLC stands for here in a little while. But first, let's talk about conflict. So, namely, what is conflict? So, interpersonal conflict is a problematic situation with 4 unique characteristics. Number 1, according to Kant, is interdependence. And so this is both parties relying on each other, whatever that may seem, whether that's being important to each other, or they expect to work together again. So, maybe it's not just a one-off project that you work together with somebody, but something that you're going to see in the office every day. So you want things to be comfortable. You don't want to have that unpleasantness of unresolved conflict. Number 2 is incompatibility. So this is incompatibility of, that could be goals or outcomes as well as the means goals or outcomes. So we want different things. I want X and she wants Y. Just totally different, cannot do the same thing. Or it could be the means to the same thing. So we both want to get to X, but we want to do it by different ways that we can't do together. That's the incompatibility that we're talking about here. Thirdly, we're talking about relational danger. That if unmanaged, this conflict could adversely affect the relationship. That could be damaging in the long term. That could be undermining of trust or comfortability or openness with one another. And that matters because this person is either important to us or we expect to work with them again, or a combination of all these things. And finally, urgency. This could just be an urgency that you'd rather want it done sooner than later. That's urgent enough in this case. And so, you're probably, that is going to be true if this person is interdependent with you, and if you do have concern about that relational danger, that probably is going to be an urgent desire of yours. So let's talk about some different responses to conflict. So I have 5 here for us to go through briefly. First is avoidance. So people do their best not to engage in conflict. Many of us are familiar with this. Just kind of shirk it off, say this is not something that I need to deal with right now. I don't want to deal with that. Anything like that, just generally avoiding, not engaging whatsoever. Next is accommodation. So this is kind of giving in to try to maintain this illusion of harmony, that you're just going to say, oh no, don't worry about it, I'm okay. Even if you're really not okay, you're still going to say that. And that is what that response of accommodation looks like. And so avoidance and accommodation, they share this danger of this emotional bottling up. And bottling up all these feelings and emotions over time can eventually lead to some kind of emotional explosion that can be far more damaging than just those initial and small conflicts that built up into it. Next, we're going to talk about a competitive response. So in the competitive response, what that can often lead to is very intense and escalating behavior. And if you meet somebody that also comes with that competitive response, what's going to happen is you're going to escalate, and then they're going to escalate. They're going to escalate, they're getting a little bit more intense, then you're going to get a little bit more intense. And so it just keeps climbing up until it's far too aggressive, far too potentially violent, and certainly very damaging. So competition, the competitive approach or response to conflict can be very damaging as well. Next, can be just as damaging but not as expressive or outwardly or directly is passive aggression. So that's Kahn says here, attempt to get what they want by underhanded means. So going behind somebody's back, over their head, backstabbing somebody. All these things are behaviors that are associated with this passive aggression. So clearly has a very negative connotation by those words associated with it. And so we need to try to stay away from that. Perhaps some of you have even been victims of that, and maybe that's what you wrote down earlier. But we need to be aware that that is still a conflict response, and something that if that is your method, maybe you can apply what we're learning today, and you can change that over time. So, and finally, we're going to talk about collaboration. So collaboration by Kahn here means using integrated behaviors such as cooperation, collective action, that we are doing this together, and mutual assistance, that we're going to help each other out through this process, and developing mutually satisfying agreements to finally solve problems. And when I say finally solve problems, that means to absolutely resolve them, that we don't need to come back to this problem in a month, that it is over now. And so before we talk about STLC, I want you guys to go through this exercise really quick on page 5 of your participant manual, just to understand where you currently are in your conflict response tendency. So just take a few minutes to fill that out and then talk about that with those that you are with. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's talk about STLC. So that means stop, think, listen, and communicate. Or for more hand gestures than that, stop, think, listen, and then communicate. And so let's break these down one at a time here. So first, how to stop. Kahn gives us 4 suggestions, and these are just behaviors I have here on this bullet. These are not prescriptive, they're just descriptive of these are the things that something like these things is something that you can do. So that could be something like, just exiting yourself temporarily to calm yourself with the intention of coming back to resolve it. So it's not an avoidance, it's not a total disengagement, just a temporary disengagement to kind of collect yourself, calm yourself, get out of those reactive emotions. You can get a glass of water and just kind of sip, and just sip on that and just relax. Count backwards from 100. Most people, that's going to take you a while. Change the problematic topic for a while to allow for the air to clear. So think about something else, just kind of settle down for a little bit. And so what I'd like you to do now is take some time and write down things that are calming to you. That could be something like taking a walk, or listening to music while you walk, or exercising, listening to a good podcast, whatever that is for you. Take a few minutes to write those down and then talk about those. Maybe give each other some creative ideas on how to stop in these conflict scenarios. So go ahead and pause the video here. Okay, so now that you guys have creatively come up with solutions on how to stop, let's talk about how to think. So Kahn says to consider the conflict's cause and possible outcomes before you take action. So we're going to think all the way through what happened. Okay, so what already happened and what could happen. And so this is not a rehashing to try to figure out what you should have said, or oh, that would have been a really good one. Nothing like that. This is trying to think objectively, as the next one is. It's critical that you think of as objectively as possible, not to take the conflict personally, but to really just look at it for what it is, and not what you think it could be, but strictly as what it is. And so then we're going to talk about 5 things to think about specifically. So number 1 is nothing. So that means that you think about doing nothing. That could I live with this situation just as it is with no change? Perhaps that's true, but if that would still be problematic, then that means that we need to think about how to resolve this conflict. Next up would be the other person. So like, can I persuade them to change, or can I get them to change their behavior or wants? You may, and that might be something that you could be able to do, but often persuading or trying to change others could only lead to more conflicts, so you need to be very careful about that one. Next would be your situation. So that'd be kind of a more drastic measure of leaving the job, getting out of that situation, leaving that community or that living arrangement or something like that. Getting out of the situation, a bit more drastic, but something to think about in these situations. And next is yourself. Can I change my own wants, my own behaviors, my own attitudes? That's important to consider in this, because if you're in the conflict, part of it is about you. So you need to understand yourself and where you are in this conflict. And finally, think about your goals. What is the ideal thing that I could get out of this? Whether that is, I want to get that new stapler or something small like that, or even if it's something instrumental or an object, or if it's something relational that I need this relationship to change, or something behavioral, I want their behavior to change. Think about what that is and really have a good understanding of what your goal is through this conflict. Next, how to listen. So listening consists of focusing one's attention on the other person. And it does not come naturally. It's a skill that needs to be developed here. And so now we're going to talk about listening involves both an empathetic response to the other person and a commitment to hear all that the other person has to say. And that can be really, really difficult sometimes because of this last point. Because one very common barrier to listening is defensiveness. So that's an emotionally charged state that occurs when we perceive an attack. So sometimes when we're hearing the other person, we're listening to them, we hear something that feels like an attack on us, and so we get all revved up again, and then we need to cool down again, we need to think again. And so if not handled, this defensiveness can totally derail this communication process, so we need to be very aware of it. Next, we're going to talk about how to communicate. So in this context, we're specifically talking about assertive communication, and that's defined here as the ability to speak up for one's interests, concerns, or rights in a way that does not interfere with the interests or infringes on the rights of the other person. And so assertiveness is a means to avoid bottling up those emotions that I'm just going to express my own interests, my concerns, my rights. And so part of assertive communication, it gives the other person the chance to improve the situation. That I'm telling my friend what happened and giving them the opportunity to reconcile on their portion. But also it's important that I need to be willing to hear them. I need to hear their side. I need to let them assertively communicate their interests, their concerns or rights. So that's also a very important part of communicating in this method. So just to wrap up everything that we've been through, this is the STLC method. So that is stop, think, listen, and communicate. And so after today, I hope that you will be able to remember these and employ these methods in your communication and conflict scenarios. It's not something that we need to be scared about. It's not something that we need to worry about, but something that does need to be managed and managed rightly. So please consider doing these things instead of avoiding it, instead of accommodating, anything like that. Just remember to stop, think, listen, and communicate. If you have any questions or want more resources, please contact us through the website or our email. Thank you so much for your time. Hope you learned something today and you can apply this to your scenario. Here are the references that went into this training for you, and have a great day.